This is Erin Balsa from House of Bald, and you're listening to the Notorious Thought Leader podcast. My guest today is Kari Hanson, VP of Marketing at Spiro. Thanks for being here, Kari.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, of course. So I wanted to have you on for two main reasons. First, because I know that you're passionate about how thought leadership feeds category creation, as am I, and you've had major success growing new categories. Second, because I am totally digging Spiro's mission. We're not fixing CRM, we're killing it. That's bold. I love it. And I'd love to really talk about how thought leadership plays into your strategy at Spiro. But first, I'd love to start by asking you the same question that I ask every guest who comes on the show. And that is, in your view, what is thought leadership?
I think thought leadership is all about building credibility in your market. And it could be that you are super smart and you are an astrophysicist. It could be that you are very controversial and you have a new approach introducing the 4-day work week. But it's really about building that credibility behind your opinions and your views in a specific market.
Okay. So, we were talking before this call and I told you that I think thought leadership is a misunderstood term. Do you feel it's misunderstood? And if not, why?
That's a loaded question. I do think it's misunderstood because I think the challenge is that thought leadership is so broad, it becomes almost meaningless. And so, it really comes down to within a startup or a smaller company specifically, because that's really where thought leadership can be your biggest asset. I think it's really about figuring out what does it mean to you and what is the goal. To some people, they hear thought leadership and they just think, well, I'm the expert. And yes, you are the expert, but you don't have to be the expert that is the smartest. You could be the expert that has the most opinions, has the most experience. It doesn't have to be, I am the one person who everybody comes to answer things. It's more about, we have a voice, we have an opinion, we have a viewpoint, and we have the credibility behind that people seek our advice and our opinion and our thoughts around it.
I'm digging into two things that you said. The first is we. So a lot of people think thought leadership is just one individual at a company, typically C-level leader. Others think about thought leadership in terms of we, speaking on behalf of the company. So I'd love to know, why did you say we and what exactly do you mean by we?
Well, when I say we, I mean the collective we. I think that first and foremost, a company has to have sort of that platform that they're trying to evangelize, and then everybody lines up behind it. And it can be the C-suite, it can be the intern, it can be the person that you greet when you walk in the door, but everybody has to have a piece of that mantra. Somebody might have the most experience, somebody might be the most passionate about it, somebody might just be the one that talks about what the company is doing, but everybody aligns behind it because, a voice of 100 is much louder than a voice of one.
I love that. So do you think that any employee within a company can be a thought leader by sharing their company's thought leadership or the voice of the company? Or is there some sort of differentiation between being an employee sharing a company's, strong point of view and actually being the one to have the unique thoughts and the unique point of view? Where's that line?
I think it is I'm going to say yes, but yes, I think everyone can be a thought leader, but I think not everyone can be the expert, and there has to be certain experts. And so at a company perspective, I think a lot of times it's about amplifying what the company is doing, what the actual thought leaders typically, it might be a person closest to the product, it might be somebody in the C-suite, it might be a handful, but it's really about amplifying that. And I think where an employee can really start building on those tailwinds and amplifying it is connecting the dots. Because when a company does something, that's not thought leadership, that's, moving forward. And I think connecting, hey, our company just did this, and this is why it's feeding into our CTO or our CMO's vision, and sort of building that thread. I think that's the first step for an employee to, one, help amplify the company's thought leadership, but also to get his or her name out there. And then as they have more experience and more credibility, they can actually have their own sort of stake in the ground on the thought leadership piece. But, you're not going to have everybody in the company. You can't have 100 different takes on what that is, if that makes sense.
That does. I love the word amplify too. So myself, I can share a quick story. In my
Yeah.
last job, I was, brand new to the human capital management space. I'd never worked in HR before. And now here we are creating content for CHROs and senior HR leaders. So of course, I don't have the credibility. I don't have the years of experience. But what I had was really brilliant in-house subject matter experts who had walked a mile in that senior HR leader's shoes, as well as consultants who had consulted for many years in companies and big consulting firms. So I could really rely on them as well as their vision for the product and the brand and the category. So I wasn't being a thought leader because those were not my thoughts, but I was an amplifier. And I think it's a really powerful way to think about how employees can play a huge role in, helping the company share that unique point of view and that thought leadership.
Yeah, I think that's a great example because I think it's all about connecting. And if you think about when you watch the news, if you watch the news, the press secretary for the White House, it doesn't matter who is the president, the press secretary is the person that is amplifying and connecting and taking, well, this is the official opinion. I'm going to this, the Pentagon for this. And sort of everybody goes to that one person for the answers. And that person knows all the answers. And I think this is where the employees, if you pay attention, you know what the company, or you should know what the company is doing, you know what your customers are doing. And so at a trade show or in conversations, you can sort of connect all of the dots and be that amplifier and, almost act as, and I hate to, in that format, to call it a press secretary because it's not really about the PR, but it's, you can take it and you can help and be that resource. And if you're a resource and you can amplify it, it helps build your audience and your credibility so that when you do start adding your opinion and you can sort of tiptoe of like, this was a really interesting piece and here's why I thought it was interesting, you'll start seeing this evolution where employees start adding their voice to it. And then not only are they amplifying somebody else's voice, but they're building on it. And it just sort of crescendos a little bit.
I love that. We do have people that are listening that are employees and marketers. We also have people listening that are more senior leaders and founders. So I'd love to hear if you have any advice for those senior leaders and founders who are trying to put out a strong vision to enable their employees to understand the positioning, the messaging, how they can amplify. Do you have any tips on how leaders could do that?
I think it all comes down to talking and simplifying. And so if you want to have a platform, first you have to have a platform and you should be able to we call it the brand platform, but you should be able to have a single statement of what is your opinion. It could be, this is where the market is headed. It could be, this is what's missing in the market. It could be, this is something that everybody needs and it's going to change the world. But whatever that opinion is, you have to have it. And it's sort of the umbrella, and it's not what the company does. It has nothing to do with it, but it's related. And so when you have that opinion and you can put it into a single sentence, then it's really easy to start putting the pillars in place. And you can almost have a diagram of, and this is how our company fits into that vision. And this is how our product fits into that vision. And here's what our customers are doing to fit into that vision. And here's how we're taking what the customers are learning or what they're missing. And you sort of start connecting the dots. And when you have that in place, and it's not easy, it's really easy to write a 10,000 word paper, but to get it down onto a single slide of this is what we're doing and here's how things fit in. But then you can start having the conversations, and it really needs to be a conversation, not a lecture. So you meet with the employees, you let them know, look, this is our vision, this is what we're doing. There's probably some guardrails of, we're not going down this path, we're going down this path, to explain a few things. But then they need to start asking questions because you want them to internalize that and put it in their own words. And so if they start saying, oh, well, I've been working with this customer, or I was talking to this partner and they're doing this, and this is how I see it fits in, you need to help them understand, like, yes, that's how it fits in. Maybe we would use different words. Maybe we would tie it in here, but you have to help them build that story so that they understand it. And the more that they have that context, the more that they can take it out and amplify it for you.
I love that. Do you feel like that's more important among companies who are trying to design a new category, or is it important for all companies across the board?
I think it's important for everybody. If you want to have a vision that everybody is pushing towards, you have to have it. I think when you start talking about category creation, repetition and consistency is key. And then the guardrails are much thinner, because that's also where if you're talking, now we're going to switch gears slightly, but if you're going to build a category or a market category, there's two ways that you could do it. You could take the HubSpot path, where they didn't create a category, they coined a term for account-based marketing or email automation or whatever category you want to put them in. But if you look at their investment returns, they are not in the inbound category. But they coined this big term about inbound marketing. The marketers could say they bastardized it, and now everybody thinks that customers just come to you. But they focus on that term. This is what that means, and all roads led to that term. The other path is if you're actually trying to create a category in that analysts are using your definition, it takes a little bit longer because you have to define what the category is. And so that's the side of the house that I have experience with. And that's where you have to have this vision, you have to have this platform, and you have to be very clear with your employees, because you're helping to explain to the market, here's the existing category, and here's why a subset actually should be in this different category, and this is the term, and this is what it means. And so that's a very technical explanation that everybody has to be on the same page with, and there is no room for them to editorialize of, well, maybe this could pull into it too. Like, they have to have an answer. And so you have to make sure that they know what that is, so that they can be very repetitive. But then the thought leadership on top of it is sort of the why and what's missing. And that's where they can really sort of put it in their own words. But I think, just to bring that sort of long-winded answer back, is if you're trying to create a category, everybody has to be speaking from the same playbook, and it has to be consistent to the point that 18 months down the road, when you feel like we have been saying the same thing over and over again, that's probably when it is just beginning to resonate externally, and you still have another year or two to keep saying it over and over and over again.
Totally. Even with, social posts, you could post 5 things and say the same thing 5 different ways. It doesn't guarantee that everyone in your audience saw all 5 posts. They might have seen one. So if you, put that same message out 100 times over the course of a year, then it's only starting to get seen by everyone, and seen enough that it becomes sticky, right?
Right. Well, and I think with category creation, it's much more than, you're pushing that messaging out,
Yeah.
but you also have to sort of put it in context for everybody else. So just like you would explain to your employees, if you're talking to the press, or you're talking to an analyst, or your customers, or a partner, if a competitor makes an announcement, you have to explain why that validates this market that you're talking about. Well, obviously they were missing this whole big section of their product, because this is why the market is going here. If they make an acquisition, you can point out, like, that validates the need for this market, because look, the tech leader in the space is coming in here. Customers can, if they start using the words, you can amplify that and explain to everybody. And so it's really about having the same kind of conversation externally as you are internally, but contextualizing it and bringing in competitors and bringing in what else is going on in the world, so that the media can, and the analysts, and frankly, even other competitors, can sort of hear that message, internalize it, and start using the same thing. Because if you want to create a category, it's not just about sort of the one way push out, but you need the market to actually start using the same playbook that you're using.
Right. And like you said before, competitors, you want to get a little angry, maybe, our competitors are calling themselves our category. No, don't get angry, right? That means that you're succeeding.
Yeah. At SailPoint, when I joined, one of the first things that we were trying to do was create a new category, because we were competing against provisioning. We had a completely different solution, and we were selling to the Fortune 500, where they were very focused on the Gartner Magic Quadrant. And we were never going to win that quadrant, because, they were looking at jalopies and we had a freight train. And so we recreated it, but I warned everybody that, at some point, we're going to coin the term, analysts are going to eventually use a different version of the term, but competitors at some point are going to take this, and they might change it a little bit, but they're going to use our term, and it's going to really upset the employees, and they're going to get really mad. But it's actually a good thing, because when the competitors start using the term and the definition, and even if they try to add to it a little bit, it's a good thing, because it means you're onto something, because you cannot create a market if you don't have other competitors and companies in that market. And so at SailPoint, when our competitors, the category was identity governance, and one of our competitors started using access governance, and our employees had been amplifying our thought leadership, and they took it so personally, and they were like, oh, they're using, they're stealing our idea. And it took us a while to get them to understand that they're not stealing our idea. they're adding to it. And now we have analysts and customers are hearing from two companies saying, no, there needs to be a new market. And then when the public companies started using their version of the term, it sort of added. And the great thing about the thought leadership that we were doing, because we had been pushing it for so long, our term really is the one that took hold because we were having those conversations for the longest. And as everybody sort of jumped on the bandwagon and really started pushing it, it just sort of solidified, and we were able to have those conversations with industry analysts, investors, to say, look, they're agreeing with us too. And they just sort of adopted our term and it took off. And for a while, a couple of the analysts tried to, make everybody happy and use a hybrid of everybody. But finally they were like, you know what, that's stupid. We should use the term that we started out with in the first place.
Out of curiosity, how long did that take before analysts and these investors started adopting the category?
So at SailPoint, I started in 2008, and I would say we started seeing the competitors very quickly started. One of the competitors, also a startup, started using their version of the term, but we were pushing with the analysts, and the Gartner, they came out with the identity, they call it the Identity and Access Governance Magic Quadrant, which was the biggest, it was the most exciting thing. It was longer by the time it was published, but I think it was about 4 years when they told us they want to start. They started doing other pieces, but when it was really the Magic Quadrant was like the holy grail. So I would say it was about 4 years when they said they wanted to do it. And then very quickly, Forrester followed with a different term, but the same concept. And so it was like, don't worry about the term, people. Like, we're focused on the market definition. And so that was a really big win. And then and then once that came, it was sort of okay, but now we have to get them to get rid of the other Magic Quadrant because there's an existing one that we think should be part of it. And so we ultimately pushed them, and we had a lot of market momentum. And so they collapsed the two. And so I would say it was 7 or 8 years from when we first started, when the Magic Quadrant, which is the Gartner for your readers, if they're not in tech, it's like a big consumer report, but for enterprise software, there was a Gartner Magic Quadrant, a Forrester wave, and there was also a growing wave of analysts on the street starting to pay attention to this identity governance. And it was, it had its own conferences and everything like that. And so it was a long road, but when we IPO'd in 2017 at SailPoint, we were sort of known as, we created this market, and it was a multi-billion-dollar market by that time of all of the companies that played into it. But it took a long time.
That's fantastic, right? How many people come out and they try to create a category and they say, we created a category, but to your point, you tried to create a category, but it's not truly a category until it's adopted fully by the analyst and the investors. Would you agree?
Yeah, well, I think there's a difference between, we coined a term, we coined a category, and there's a lot of value to that. HubSpot
right,
did
there
very
sure
well.
is.
Everybody associates inbound with them. But if you look at their industry reports, they are not in inbound reports. They're in marketing automation, CRM. And then there's category creation in terms of really focused market creation. And I think that's where, it really changes the valuation of your company. And it's a very different strategy, but it's hard. And it's not often that happens.
That's such a great point. So thank you for making that. I know there's a lot of confusion and nuance around category design as well. So thanks. So double clicking into what you said a few minutes ago about, your employees at SailPoint were able to amplify your thought leadership. I'd love to talk a little bit about how you thought about thought leadership in that role at that company, and what kind of thought leadership you were doing back then to help with your category creation and adoption.
Yeah, I think it's very similar to the playbook I've used at all of my companies. We started with, what does the company trying to do? And it's really, there's a need for this market. We had certain executives and product people that were focused on talking to the technical analysts. We had certain ones that were talking to the press, talking publicly. And then we made sure that anyone talking to customers, we just sort of followed suit. And we did a lot of bylines, which are, opinion pieces that you can place in publications. We did a lot of speaking at trade shows This was probably 15 years ago, where trade shows were really big. I guess they're coming back slowly post-pandemic, but if we could talk to somebody about what identity governance was, we were talking about them. We would go to partners and we would talk at their sales kickoffs. We would have different employees who were interfacing talk about, this is what we're doing, this is how it fits in. And so it was almost, we were evangelizing the market, and then we were evangelizing, and by the way, here's our company and our product and what we do. And so it was really a 1-2 punch, but it was whoever was speaking to somebody outside of the company, they were talking about what this market was in a way that was meaningful. And certainly the key executives, it was the CMO, the president, and the CEO. They really were the evangelists. The CTO would talk to some very technical people, talk to some industry analysts. And it was just over and over and over again. And we had a pretty aggressive campaign around getting it out there. If we talked about customers, explaining how, this was completely a different approach to them. Anytime there was a competitor who'd made an announcement, we did a whole push on the PR team to reach out to the press who would cover that and help them put it in context. SailPoint was a security company. So anytime there was a security breach, which, somebody stole passwords, it happened all the time. That gave us an opportunity to explain, well, see, this is why the old approach isn't working. This is what you need. It also helped with compliance. And at the time, the stars just aligned from a thought leadership perspective. The GDPR came out, and that was all around what our, one of the big mantras that we were pushing. So there was HIPAA, you name the alphabet soup of privacy laws. We could have a commentary with them around, and this is why this whole new approach, what you had isn't working. And so we pushed it and pushed it and pushed it. And then as we would talk about the company, because of course, any company that's up and coming, you want to talk about your product, we would connect the dots. And sometimes it would be very aggressively, and sometimes it would just be sort of a subtle, and this is obviously, if you're in identity governance, you need these capabilities. And so you would have it. And then we also did a lot of really fun on the PR and the analyst side. We did some fun content creation where we would go out and we would survey 1,000 people, and we would come up with our own industry reports. And then we would put out research tying it to, the need for the space that we were creating. And anywhere that we could come up with a reason to come up with content, whether it be speaking or push out an infographic, you name it, we were focused on just building it and building it and building it. And of course, over time, eventually we had a lot of people on the marketing team building some of that content. The product team was focused on it. It became everybody's job to talk about and evangelize this market.
That's great. I'm a content person. That's my background. So I'm very passionate about original research and finding ways to get that message out in organic channels. So of course, you're complementing your speaking engagements, you're complementing your bylines and publications with your content on your native channels. So I'm wondering, either at SailPoint or now at Spiro, are you leaning into the more popular channels for content creation today, such as LinkedIn, podcasts? I know that you have a podcast going, so I'd just love to kind of think about or talk about if that plays into your thought leadership strategy today.
Yes. So I think content drives everything. And, my strategy has always been write once, publish 20 times.
I love it.
That's the goal. So, you do a report, it feeds out everything you do. And, now at Spiro, we are also focused on thought leadership. It's great for any smaller company because this is really how you can set yourself apart. And, one of the challenges with content, it's hard to come up with content and you can't have a single person doing it. And so I view a lot of the more popular channels now, like podcasts. We are doing a podcast. It's a great way, instead of doing customer case studies, we could just have our customers talk about what's going on in the market, which everyone wants to talk about anyway. I fully understand that from a marketing perspective, there are certain people who always come to me saying, I want to have a case study, but the majority of the market wants to hear what our customers have to say, not what our customers have to say about us. The fact that they're using us speaks volumes. And so I think the podcast is a great opportunity for us to do that. But for us, we're also, as part of the podcast, we're transcribing it. So that gives us a whole second page on our website that we can SEO, because you can't SEO audio. I mean, maybe you can, but you can SEO the transcription a lot easier. And once you have that transcription, you can turn it into summaries that you put on LinkedIn. You can pull little pieces out for blogs. Like you can start taking pieces of those, and you could take 4 or 5 different interviews and start connecting the dots and come up with new content. And so this is where, you write once, you publish 20 times. And so I think that there is the podcast, which is content creation, which is amazing. I don't view our podcast as the goal of the podcast is to get a lot of viewers. It's really about to help us amplify the voice, to help us associate ourselves with certain topics, and to help us create more content that can actually go out somewhere else. And some of that content drives people back to the podcast. Some of the podcast, drives people to somebody else, but it takes on a life of its own. And I think you can do the same with video. If you're really good at video, if you're not really good at video, you're not comfortable with video, it's really hard to do. And so why, again, the podcast is a lot easier. We do record the video on our podcast, but a lot of the guests that we have, they don't really want to be on video. So we'll do it with the understanding that we're going to do a 90-second promo, but the rest will only be audio. Because we want them to be comfortable. We want the content to stand on its own. And so that's okay. And I think this is another challenge with content creation is everybody looks out, when you say the more popular mediums, my caution to everybody is that it doesn't matter what's popular. It matters where the people that you're talking to are and whether they want to engage with you. At SailPoint, we sold to CIOs. They were all on Facebook, and they were not at all interested in a company finding them on Facebook because they were very focused on privacy. And so, they were on LinkedIn. That's where you go for the B2B space. Some people like the TikTok videos, some people don't, but it's really about where are your buyers and your influencers? What kind of content do they want? And what kind of content can you come up with quickly and easily and repeatably? Because that's the challenge. You're, like I said, you're a content person, so you understand like it's really hard to come up with the content.
It sure is. And a report typically takes 3 months from start to finish, right? By the time you come up with, this kind of ideal storyline, and you write your survey and you build it and you get your audience, your panel, maybe you have to partner with a third party vendor. There's so many moving pieces, right? So if you're going to invest 3 months to create this wonderful piece of original research, you better have a plan for squeezing the most juice out of that for the next 6 to 12 months, right? Because otherwise you just wasted a lot of time if it's only going to be a one and done.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I would say the flip side of that is sometimes, you don't have 3 months, and that's okay too. At SailPoint, one of the things that we used to do is we would have a customer speak at a trade show. They were very, very high quality speaking sessions, packed room. We would ask the customer, before you speak, can you ask this one question? And they would ask a question, people would raise their hand, we would put it out, and then we could put that out on social media saying, hey, AIG just was getting ready to speak. We asked everybody in the audience, a room of about 400 people, about 300 hands were raised, yes. And it's okay that it doesn't have to be third-party research. It's just another anecdote, and it gives them something that they can point to. And we had the credibility so that we could put those out, and they trusted us. Sometimes we would walk around a trade show floor and just ask, you don't have time to bring in a researcher and interview 1,000 people. And so we literally had sticky notes, and we just walked around a trade show floor and asked some people, and then we could put out commentary around it, and we could do fast. But those quick hits worked because we did the very thoughtful longer term ones. And so we had the credibility. And this is part of thought leadership. I think people, they don't pay attention to is it's not just about having a voice. It's about having a voice that you've backed up with examples, you've backed up with experience, you've built the credibility, because then you can move fast and you can pivot and you can keep going. And when they trusted us, we could go around the show floor and we could let the press know who were covering the show, hey, unscientific, we got about 150 hash marks, but this is what they're saying. And it's just, it feeds into a larger story, but it was helpful, and the press loved it.
I love that too. And that's something we also did at my last job. It was so easy. We'd go to an event, we'd have like a camera guy, we'd kind of have him follow him, kind of man on the street, person on the street videos, but right inside the show. It's such an easy way to collect insights and get these nice little video clips that you can then put on social. You can use it in a million different ways, right? It's like, doesn't have to be super fancy. There's so many ways to get these insights. Something that I do for this podcast, this is still super new. You're only the 5th person I'm interviewing. But what I've been doing is I've been having people, you did it, fill out a really quick 10-second yes or no. Here's 10 questions. For me, they're kind of burning questions that need to be answered in the market. Yes or no, I want your gut reaction. And that can easily be put out once I start to get a good amount of people. I have about, I think, 12 people have filled it out so far. That is a form of original research, right? Because,
Right.
if I ask 50 people by the end of the year, and these are all really bright, top marketing leaders, they're credible. So these answers are going to be meaningful to people, right? When it starts to come out, like 80% of marketing leaders say that thought leadership is a misunderstood term. Maybe these answers are going to prove me wrong. I came into the show having my own kind of biases and thoughts and opinions, and for sure I'm going to be proven wrong. And that's kind of like the great thing about doing a show like this. It's just making you have more depth to your understanding and a more kind of robust experience by getting the experience of others. So it's really great. So thank you. Last question, something that I think I'd love to explore with you: strategic narrative. So companies spend a lot of resources, a lot of time, a lot of money on their strategic narrative because it's so important. And I know that there can be some confusion around, is a strategic narrative the company's greatest form of thought leadership or not? So I'd love to hear your thoughts around that question. Is a strategic narrative a company's greatest form of thought leadership?
No, but it is necessary. But I will say, if anybody at a smaller company is paying more than a couple $100s to bring somebody in to create a strategic narrative, you are getting taken to the bank, and it is not worth your time, because somebody will come in and they will tell a really, really exciting story, and it'll sound really good. And, when I joined Spiro, they actually had worked with a company that had come up with, sort of an outsourced marketing while they were trying to figure out what they were going to do with the marketing program. And I was the first marketing leader that they came in. So, I walked in and they're like, hey, we were working with this company. This is their strategic narrative. And I looked at it and I'm like, it's an interesting read, but what am I going to do with this? Because it doesn't tie to, like, this isn't where we're going. It doesn't work. And so I think the strategic narrative really, it's important to have, but I think it's more important to have that strategic platform of, this is what it is, this is what we're doing. And really the strategic narrative, it's not a fancy story of the way to say it in, the New York Times bestseller list. It is, this is what our opinion is, and these are the pillars that it fills in. If you're trying to create a market, our strategic narrative, if you will, if you want to use that term at SailPoint, was, there's a need for identity governance. This is what's missing in the market. This is why identity governance, it's sort of a hybrid of 2 or 3 different markets, but you need a single solution. Here's who it was the pillars. And then you can build that into a different story, but it depends on who's giving the story. Like, there isn't a single narrative. There is a single path. And the CTO, the chief technical officer, is going to tell a technical version of that. Somebody who's engaging with customers is going to talk about, here's how customers are adopting it, here's what they're missing, here's what they're frustrated with. The CEO is going to tell, here's how our company is going there, here's where I see the market going. Everybody has a different take on that. And so there can't be a single narrative, if you will. And I think and I spent 10 years at a marketing agency. Everyone's like, oh, you got to have it, you got to have it. You do need to have something, but it's not the most important, this 5-paragraph narrative. It's not a silver bullet. You need the framework. And then depending on who you talk to, it needs to be able to evolve.
Living, breathing strategic narrative.
Right. It's more of you need a strategic platform, and the narrative, everybody has their own narrative. And it's not about how great you can tell the story. It's how good the story is. And I think that's where, I always get hesitant when I hear, some of my friends who are running marketing, they're like, oh, we're going to bring in this company, they're going to help us with the narrative. I'm like, you don't know your framework? And they're like, no, we know the framework. We just want to make it sound better. And I'm like, okay, but after, like, that's a one and done. That's not what you need. There's not a single document, that you can take out and you can push. And as you get bigger, I'm going to backtrack a little bit of, like, you will eventually have like a brand manifesto, you'll have a brand platform, but that's not really, when you start talking about what a strategic narrative is, I personally believe a strategic narrative comes down to that platform and that messaging framework. And then you can work with people on, here's the technical way to say it. Here's, there's different iterations of saying it, but there's only so many cycles that you can spin coming up with just the right words. And so focus on that one slide, and then everything else will fall into place.
I love it. Thank you, Kari. This has been really, really enlightening and helpful. So I really appreciate you coming on the show. If people would like to follow you or follow Spiro, I'm going to leave a bunch of links on my website in the show notes. But just for listeners who might not come onto the show notes, if you could just share the best way for people to follow you or your company.
Yeah, well, if you want to check out Spiro.ai, that's our website. We have a podcast, we have a blog. You can sort of stay up on everything that we're doing as we're working on our category creation and our thought leadership. And if you want to follow me, I'm on LinkedIn as Kari Hanson. I think I was one of the first, clearly, to be able to just use my name.
That's great. I'm the only Erin Balsa on LinkedIn. How lucky am I?
There are multiple Kari Hansons. I'm only the / Kari Hanson.
You got on
early. And I actually, I not to derail us, but I'm actually I'm kicking myself because in the early days, I was just at Kari on Twitter, and somebody told me, well, you should put your last name. So I gave it up. And now I'm like, oh, I could have just been just at Kari. And
that would have been so badass, just at Kari.
I had it for the first 3 or 4 years of Twitter. And then somebody was like, you really should put your last name. And so I was like, oh, okay, I'll change it. And now I'm like, oh, what was I thinking? I want it back.
Bummer. Live and learn. All right. Well, thank you so much, Kari. I hope you have a great rest of the day.
Yes. Thanks for having me. I love talking about this.
All right. Awesome. Thank you.
To find out more about House of Bold, head to houseofbold.com. That's HAUS. And then make sure to subscribe to the Notorious Thought Leader in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts, so you never miss an episode. Thanks for joining me. See you next time.